So the Jaguars are currently done with their first week of free agency, and this free agency was a lot different than the ones in the past because this was the first free agency that we've gone through since 2012 without Dave Caldwell. For reference, I was still in high school in 2012. And really, a lot of different things happened, and we really looked at it, and a lot of us didn't really know what to expect. The Jaguars had a lot of cap space. The Jaguars had a lot of needs, and we did not know exactly how the Jaguars were going to attack this. A lot of times, Dave Caldwell, it seems like in this situation, he would go out there and spend a lot of money. It didn't seem like the same thing really happened with the Jaguars. So in this video, I want to go ahead and review, basically give you guys a bunch of takeaways that I had from the 2021 free agency period. Now, my first takeaway is that this roster really was not very good. A lot of us tend to forget that the Jaguars, as much hype as we've been getting with the first overall pick, with bringing in Urban Meyer, with having the #1 cap space in the NFL, and we were pretty much being lauded as having really the most attractive head coach / GM job, a lot of us forget really how bad this team was. This Jaguars team is 1-15. They ended the season by losing 15 straight games. So this is the first step in really improving the roster. And we really saw it that, this roster isn't very good by really exactly where they started spending money. Really, day one of free agency, they started spending money on guys that were like special teamers, guys that might not even make the team. Some guys that got contracts week one or like the first day of free agency included guys like Philip Dorsett, Rudy Ford, Jamil Agnew, just random guys like that while we've heard of Philip Dorsett, not many people really heard of the other guys. We were kind of sitting here wondering, like, what are the Jaguars doing? So day one of free agency wasn't very exciting, but really day two of free agency was when they started getting more starting level players, and we started to really understand what direction the Jaguars were going. But it was interesting that it seemed like the day one we were going after special teamers, guys to really fill in the back end of the roster before kind of diving into starter level players. Now, my second takeaway is that the Jaguars were really targeting value. A lot of us sat here and we thought that, look, the Jaguars had the most cap space. We're going to be able to really get whatever players we want, the top tight end, the top tackle, the top defensive lineman. But it really wasn't like that. The Jaguars had a value, had a limit on what they were willing to spend. And once they exceeded that amount, they went over there and kind of hired the next best guy. And, the Jaguars were very diligent in doing this. The Jaguars really did not go out there and, while they handed out some decent-sized contracts, nothing that was really record-breaking. It wasn't like 2018 where we signed Andrew Norwell to the highest guard money out there. It wasn't like we were going out there and just throwing all these contracts at players that, might have had a year of production. The Jaguars were very vigilant and really went out there and, had a value and met that value. And it was really kind of a safe way to do things. Now, that kind of leads into my next takeaway, and that is that the Jaguars are really building the team the right way. And one thing that, one reason why I thought the Jaguars might have gone out there and tried to, get this, and that guy, all the most expensive guys, whether it be like, Shaquille Barrett, Judon, the tight end, Jonnu Smith. One reason why I thought we might do that is because I really thought Urban Meyer took this Jaguars job because he wanted to go as far as he can in the first year. And with that said, he might have been spending, stupid money out there, really in the first, few days of free agency. But really, the Jaguars are building this thing the right way. History really does show that, you build a team through the draft, and teams aren't really teams aren't built through free agency. We've had some success in the past, most notably in 2017 offseason where we got guys like AJ Boye, Calais Campbell, Barry Church. But it kind of shows that you had to build teams through the draft. Teams like the Patriots, we'll see what kind of happens to them as they were going out there and signing everybody. But really, when you look at the Jaguars right now, they have a lot of draft picks. And obviously, the Jaguars are going to have a lot of cap space next year as they have the most cap space right now. And then the cap's going to go up next year. So next year, the Jaguars might look to really do a lot of spending. But the way you look at it is like, look, next year we can go out there in the draft and really start drafting some guys. And then next year we can really evaluate, because Jaguars are going to hit on some guys and they're going to miss on some guys. And really we had to kind of look at it and say, okay, from the 2020 NFL draft and the 2021 NFL draft, what did we really hit on? And what do we feel comfortable position-wise? And then what did we completely miss on? And then the positions that we really missed on, those are the positions that the Jaguars will probably try to address in free agency in the upcoming year. And then with that said, that's how we're going to really build our roster. But with all the draft capital that we have, we're going to really be able to kind of shore up some more of those spots and get these guys on cheap rookie contracts. And then in 2022, when you're more set to really make a real push into the playoffs, then we can really decide where we want to allocate our numerous amount of cap to. Now, another thing that we really learned is that Urban Meyer has a lot of growing pains going into it. And it almost seemed like Urban Meyer was a little bit underprepared for really the free agency. Obviously, the biggest things that made headlines was that it was, the whole free agency process. He didn't really like it because you were signing guys and giving big contracts to players that you never met in person or really had calls with. All these contract negotiations and signing these guys, it's the general manager talking to the agent. There's really no involvement with the player itself. And, you can understand Urban Meyer in that sense because, like we as Americans, we have to do a job interview to go to a job that we make $12 an hour at. And then when you look at it, NFL players are being signed to multi-million-dollar contracts without ever even meeting the coach or GM. So it's obviously a weird situation, but at the end of the day, it's not like Urban Meyer is at any kind of disadvantage because the whole entire NFL goes through the same thing. And this is kind of how obviously things are done in the NFL. And I don't really know if there's any changing that. Luckily, like they are able to kind of talk around, see what kind of player these guys are. The biggest thing that speaks is really the film. They get to review tape and really see what kind of player he is. And those are the things that really people grade themselves out on. So, and another thing that he wasn't really used to missing out on players. Obviously, at Ohio State, he can pretty much pick what players he wants to play at Ohio State, but now he says, oh, I'm going to go get that guy. And then they cost all this money. I want to get that guy and they exceed their value. So, it's obviously that's the way free agency works, but the Jaguars were very good at setting their value for a player because it seemed like the difference between Trent Baalke and Dave Caldwell was able to pull in these players and give them massive contracts. But, obviously when you look back at this situation, the Jaguars had one winning season. Under Dave Caldwell, every single season was a double-digit losing season outside of the big outlier, which was 2017, where they randomly went to the AFC Championship game. So this is how Trent Baalke is building things. It's obviously a low-risk situation, but we'll kind of see how it all plays out. And, another thing that he talked about was just the Florida state taxes. We all, as Jaguar fans, we all know about really the state taxes involved in Florida, how it's attractive in free agency because there's no state income taxes in Florida. Urban Meyer was like, yeah, I've never talked about taxes so much, but I was talking about taxes like crazy over here, which is funny to hear. And I do like Urban Meyer seems very transparent on things, which we'll kind of talk about later. Now, another thing that we learned is that tight end is still a huge need. And Urban Meyer basically said this. They said, look, we were able to kind of get our blocking tight end with Chris Manhertz, but we still have a big need at, really the receiving, the Y tight end, the guys that's going to go out there and catch balls. And that's not ideal really going into a, NFL draft because you might have to reach for a guy. Now, the two biggest guys are Kyle Pitts and Freiermuth. Now, there's a lot of speculation that maybe the Jaguars would try to trade up and get Kyle Pitts. I have been adamantly against that. Not necessarily because I don't want Pitts, but I just don't think that it's going to really be possible. Kyle Pitts goes as high as number 3 in mock drafts and pretty much as low as number 8 in a mock draft. So let's say he hits his floor and gets drafted at number 8. The Jaguars would have to trade up for number 25 to number 8 to get a guy like Kyle Pitts. And It's different if you're one player away from competing in a Super Bowl, but the Jaguars aren't. The Jaguars still need a lot of players, and the Jaguars aren't necessarily in win now mode right now. And while Kyle Pitts is a great player, the amount of draft capital needed to move up from there to there, it is a monumental amount. I have people throwing, oh, we'll trade them a third, a fifth, a seventh. It's going to take at least one first round pick and then multiple stuff after that. I just don't think it's going to be possible to get Kyle Pitts. While I would love him, the most ideal situation that should have happened is those pesky Rams should have just lost some more games. But Kyle Pitts, I don't see the Jaguars getting him, so it may mean the Jaguars get Freiermuth. Pretty much the experts out there kind of rate him as kind of a low to mid second rounder. The Jaguars may have to reach and get him at a number 33 overall, but the Jaguars, they might have a master plan. They might really have their diamond in the rough, a guy that they feel many GMs might have as a fourth round pick that they think they might be able to get in the third round. Just the last thing that we want is what happened to Dave Caldwell in 2019, where they had a need at tight end in 2018 in the draft, and they were never able to get that tight end. So that meant in the following year's draft, they had to overdraft a Josh Oliver in the third round, and it worked out disastrous as he never really played, and all the Jaguars got from him was a seventh round pick. So tight end is a huge need. It's not ideal to have a need going into a draft because it might mean that you're going to reach. But my whole perspective on this off season is that the Jaguars need to make sure that the offense is good for Trevor Lawrence. Make sure the offense is good. All I really want from the defense, I just want to hold opponents to like 28 points or less. That's my big expectation for the defense. Just we don't have to be 2017 Jaguars just shutting teams down, winning games 6-0, crazy stuff like that. I just want 28 points or less and let the offense go out there and do the work. I'm a little bit easier on kind of letting the back end kind of go and making sure the defensive line is good and just building up the offense like crazy, which is why I would have really tried to pony up. I would have really tried to make a run at Jonnu Smith or Hunter Henry. The Jaguars didn't do that, so now we have a huge need at receiving tight end going into the draft. And really, it's just seems like a recurrent theme for the Jaguars. It seems like every single offseason we're going to hear that the Jaguars have signed Tyler Shatley to a one-year deal, and that tight end is a huge need. Maybe we're just going to hear that for all of eternity. But yeah, tight end is still a need, so we'll see how we address that going forward. Now, another thing is that the defensive line is going to still be a big emphasis for the Jaguars. The Jaguars signed about 4 defensive linemen, and it's so refreshing to kind of hear Urban Meyer say this because as you guys have been watching a lot of my videos, I've been basically repeating the same thing that Urban Meyer was saying, where basically build up the defensive line and build it from the defensive line back. Make sure your defensive line is solid because, man, if your defensive line isn't good, if defensive line isn't getting to the quarterback's going to be able to make all the throws. Any NFL quarterback can do that. If your defense isn't stopping the run, then they don't even need a good quarterback because they can just run the ball every damn time. So the Jaguars are going to keep building the defensive line. They didn't go out there and get any big, huge names, but it seems like they got some guys like Roy Robertson Harris, some guy like G. Hard Ward, some guys that have like high upside that might have been in the like at the end of a rotation with a bunch of great players. Like, the Bears and the Ravens had a bunch of great defensive linemen. So they got some guys that, have a lot of potential, have a lot of upside, and they got them on, a little bit lower deals, not super expensive deals. But the Jaguars, did this, but the defensive line is still a big emphasis. And it'll be fascinating to kind of see what and how they really fill these holes going into this NFL draft. And also, I forgot to mention about the defensive line. Urban Meyer basically said that, look, like he expected Ohio State to have a top 5 defensive line, and he expects the Jaguars to really be in the top 4th of of defensive lines. The Jaguars are not near a top 4th of the league in defensive line. Top 4th is basically top 8. The Jaguars' defensive line last year was horrible, especially after the Josh Allen injury. Clavon Chason took a little bit of time to get going. We were porous at the interior of the defensive line, and Jaguars just didn't have much. I mean, the defensive line was just not very good, so they have a lot of work to do in that sense. And also the Jaguars are really moving to a different front. For the last several years, we were playing behind Todd Wash, who it just seemed like he got more basic and less creative as the years went on. It seemed like he was comfortable in a defensive coordinator spot. And as we all know, like if you've been in the job for longer and longer, you know, you get a little bit more comfortable and sometimes you get even lazier. It seemed like that was the case with Todd Wash, which is shocking that might happen in the NFL in this ultra competitive league where, you know, you are really graded on your wins and losses. It's a real performance-based league. And, you know, it seemed like he was just regressing every year but kept his job. But now we bring in Joe Cullen, former defensive line coach for the Ravens. And the Ravens played a lot of different fronts. You know, I'm not an expert on the X's and O's, but, you know, he would overload a lot of signs. He would do a lot of creative stunts. You know, he was very good at utilizing his defensive linemen. So that's one thing I look forward to with the Jaguars, with playing a different front, a 3-4 front. You know, the Jaguars obviously, you know, need some different personnel for this, as they've been used to running a 4-3 kind of defensive line. So we'll see what this defensive line looks like going forward, but the Jaguars really have nowhere to go but up. And I'm very confident that at the very least we got a better defensive coordinator. So hopefully we can now get better personnel in here to really fit what we want to do on a defensive line. Now, my final takeaway is that backup quarterback still remains a question mark. There was a report that Ian Rappaport said that there are teams kind of calling and inquiring about Gardner Minshew. You know, sometimes there are things put out there where it's like feelers, where it's like, okay, maybe they're going to feed this to Ian Rappaport to kind of create a buzz about maybe a trade value for Gardner Minshew. It's hard to imagine because it seems like a lot of starting quarterback positions are filled up. So maybe they're trying to drive the trade value up. And it's interesting to know what to do with Minshew. I mean, if we are planning on keeping 3 active quarterbacks on the roster, I would be all for keeping Minshew. But really, like, with the Jaguar situation, you know, Trevor Lawrence needs a veteran backup quarterback, a veteran that's been around the league for like 8+ years, because really it's great for a rookie quarterback to have a mentor. You know what I mean? Not Alex Smith, but Patrick Mahomes basically mentioned how much of a help Alex Smith was for him. You know, Aaron Rodgers was helped a lot by Brett Favre. You know, a lot of these guys are, you know, really for that. And Gardner Minshew being a third-year guy, being a guy that really gave a lot less effort, like wasn't doing his warm-ups the same when he wasn't a starting quarterback for the Jaguars. You know, Gardner Minshew needs to be a backup for a veteran, and we need a veteran to back up Trevor Lawrence. Now, me personally, I'd rather run a 2 quarterback set. It just gives you more flexibility with, you know, just being able to open up a roster spot. But we'll see how the Jaguars do things. Obviously, the Jaguars did not sign any kind of backup quarterback. So right now, the quarterback room is basically the same. Of course, we're all pretty much sharpening in and already pretty much including Trevor Lawrence as a part of this roster. So the quarterback room is the exact same. So we'll see. You know, Alex Smith is still out there. There's still some veteran quarterbacks out there. So we'll see what the direction the Jaguars take with the backup quarterback spot. And hopefully it's a good decision. So those are some of my takeaways for really the Jaguars free agency period. I still want to do another video basically breaking down each signing, breaking down each player that we released, traded for, all this different stuff. It's going to be a lot longer video, obviously, and I want to really break down the film on that one. So give me some time before coming out with that one. But those are some of my takeaways. So hope you guys all enjoyed. Big shout out to all the members of the channel. I've definitely been seeing a lot more members join. So really appreciate you guys and all you guys do for the channel. And with all that said, leave comments down below. I'd love to know what you guys really think of all the moves that the Jaguars have been making. And with all that said, see you guys in my next video. Go Jags. You guys watched the whole video. Really appreciate that. You guys can subscribe to the channel for the best source of Jaguars news on the YouTube platform. Also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at UCF_Jaguar. And you can become a member of the channel for as low as $3 a month for exclusive channel content. Thank you guys, and go Jags.